Hey, it's Joe again. I'm still looking for the truth about God, something you've probably thought about too. Last time I told you about my roommate, the one who says God isn't real. Well, Tyler says we can learn everything from science and that nobody these days needs God. And I understand why he feels that way. Anytime I hear some big new discovery about the universe, nobody mentions God. Stephen Hawking says we don't even need God to exist. So where does that leave a guy like me? I'm back here with Elena, who's getting her PhD in philosophy, and Dan, who's working on a doctorate in physics, because I want answers. They're the ones putting together the project to help students like me understand whether God and science can make sense together. They invited me to help them explore the best way to explain their ideas. So, guys, what have you got for me today? That stuff you told me last time was great. My roommate didn't know what to say about it.
Well, Joe, last time we gave you the reasons why science can't disprove God. In fact, we showed it's almost impossible to disprove anything.
Yeah, science can't disprove something unless it can rule out even the possibility of that thing existing anywhere in the universe. Remember the aliens in hiding? Just because we couldn't find any doesn't mean they don't exist. Science can't rule them out, at least not any science we can imagine.
I get that part. Science can't prove God doesn't exist, but what about proving he does exist? Is there any evidence we can see for ourselves? I mean, I know my cell phone is real. That's science I use every day. If God's as real as my phone, where can I see him? And more importantly, how can I show him to someone else, like my roommate? If anyone ever needed God, it's Tyler. Look what he put up last night.
What's up? Tyler here. Welcome to Atheist Central. I'm here to show you that God doesn't exist and prove once and for all that we can let go of this creation stuff. Now, I have to admit, things aren't going as smoothly with the roommate project as I'd like. You remember that I live with a church boy, right? Well, I thought he'd be pretty easy to knock over. Total newbie. But it's getting a little tougher. I guess the brainwashing they're doing in church is pretty good these days. He came back with all this stuff about the scientific method and philosophy. Now, I don't need to listen to the philosophy stuff. That's just stupid. Philosophy isn't real. It's just a bunch of old guys sitting around talking about stuff nobody cares about. But the science stuff is a little harder. He is right. Science can't disprove God's existence. I guess that makes a little bit of sense. Although I still think the whole idea is ridiculous. But it doesn't prove that he's real either. And it won't. There is no evidence for a God that can't be explained away by science. Never has been, never will be. Science explains it all. Time to let go, folks. We don't need him around anymore. Until next time, Tyler out.
Well, it's not quite as bad as last week, at least he was listening to you.
Yeah, I guess. But he's right, though. Disproving God is way harder than proving him. I'm really hoping you guys have something that I can show Tyler and maybe convince him he's wrong about God.
Well, I think there's some really great evidence for God out there, but you have to know where to look. But maybe that's just my opinion. Let's see what other people have to say.
What do you think? Is there any evidence for a creator in the universe?
I mean, I don't know how everything was made, but it's hard to believe that just one man, made everything, and I mean, I think in a way, for some people, they look for God because maybe it helps them, if they're going through something, and, that's fine, but I don't think that one man made, everything.
Yeah, I believe that there is, because if there wasn't a creator, then there wouldn't be anything. For something to be there has to be someone that created it, or something that created it, a higher power.
Yes, I think there's abundant evidence all around us, but that, like Jesus said and how he was speaking in parables, it's only there for those who are willing to see it.
The Bible has evidence. He's made the sun, the moon, the ocean, the earth, everything, so that's what I would say.
I think there's evidence all around you if you look at it. You can either look at everything and see a miracle, or look at everything and see nothing special.
So what does science really tell us about a creator? I've heard that the universe started with the Big Bang and it all just sort of exploded into existence. What does that mean for God? Are we supposed to believe that he just exploded into existence too? Or did he make it explode? And if he did, is there any real actual evidence that he made it happen?
Well, there's definitely a lot of scientific evidence for the Big Bang as the beginning of the universe.
And there are reasons to believe that God exists outside our universe and that he caused the Big Bang. There are logical proofs that explore the metaphysical implications.
Elena, I know you really love philosophy, but I'm not sure complicated explanations are the best way to go here. I'm really just looking for a quick answer, something I can share with my roommate next time. He doesn't even believe in philosophy.
Sorry, Joe. I know not everyone wants to hear about philosophical proofs, but if you actually want to explore the universe and God, it's going to be a little more complicated than a quick answer. The evidence is there, and it's solid. Let's walk through it together, and I think you'll see what I'm talking about.
Just don't forget to use words that normal people use.
All right, well, we'll give it a shot, Joe, but these aren't easy questions to answer, so be patient with us if we don't get it right for you the first time around. Let's start out with the Big Bang, okay?
Okay,
so most physicists believe that the universe started with the Big Bang. A giant explosion from a single point where all matter and time and space all came into being.
most. Don't they all agree?
Well, not all. Science can't prove something didn't happen or didn't exist. It's about looking at evidence and coming up with the most likely explanations for stuff. Right now, we think the Big Bang is the most likely explanation for how our universe began.
Right. I've heard that in my science classes.
Well, anyway, so most physicists believe the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe. There are a few that don't. They think there might have been something else that existed before the Big Bang. Later we're going to show you why any kind of universe, including something that existed before the Big Bang, would still need a beginning. But we can start the conversation by saying that the universe had to begin. It hasn't always been here.
Got it. But how's that evidence for God, though?
Well, look at it like this. If the universe had a beginning, that means that once upon a time it wasn't there. None of it. Not time, not space, not matter, nothing. Not even the laws of physics. All those are just a part of our universe.
Okay, got it. Nothing. Kind of like my bottle. Empty.
No, you're wrong about that one. Because even if your bottle was empty, you could refill it. So
Or recycle it.
Oops. My bad. Good point. And you're right. The bottle's still here. I could refill it. But it's different with the universe. In space, it's different. It's a vacuum. That's really nothing, right?
Well, you might think so, but it's actually still something. I mean, you can have more or less empty space, more or less of a vacuum. But there's still something there. I mean, for one, time still exists in a vacuum. A few other things do too, but my point is, even a vacuum is still actually something.
imagine this, Joe. Nothing is truly no thing at all. No time, no space, no matter, no energy. It's a complete lack of everything that ever has been or could be.
Okay. That's intense. Nothing is really nothing. Now that I get it, though, I'm not sure it changes anything. Here's the story so far. Nothing, bang, universe. How's that evidence for God?
Well, philosophers have been thinking about that for thousands of years. And despite the fact that scientists discover new things every day, there's one thing that hasn't changed. You can't get something from nothing. True nothing, which means no thing at all, not even time or space. It just can't happen. It doesn't make any sense. So there must have been something else to start the whole thing going, something that didn't need a beginning like our universe did, something that's always been here. Otherwise, the universe couldn't have began, but we know it did.
You're talking about God, right? You're saying he started it? So then who started God?
Nobody. If God didn't have a beginning, then he doesn't need anyone to start him. And unlike the universe, there's no reason to believe God had a beginning at all. Remember, he's infinite. In fact, to use some of those big words you don't like hearing, there are several airtight philosophical proofs that indicate he couldn't have had a beginning.
Elena, I think philosophy is great, but I still have trouble taking it as seriously as science. How could all those old guys have known as much about the world as our modern scientists?
Philosophy is based on the same kind of logic and building of theoretical models that you use in math and physics. In its own way, it's a kind of science, a science of ideas based on logic. And logic doesn't change. If 1 + 1 = 2 1,000 years ago, it still equals 2 today. Doesn't matter who's doing the math.
Right, and even though philosophy doesn't use the scientific method, it's not so different from some of the more theoretical kinds of science. In fact, there's an entire discipline called the philosophy of mathematics.
This stuff just gets more complicated, doesn't it? But you say these proofs show that God couldn't have had a beginning.
Yes, and if you want to learn more, I can give you all kinds of stuff to read, like we said before, but you don't have to read it all yourself to take it seriously. It's not controversial stuff at all, and you can find it in any library. But let's get back to the original question. Is there any scientific evidence for God? Our argument is that yes, there is, because the universe had a beginning, and anything that has a beginning has to have something to start it.
I get that. But it sounds like the whole argument falls apart if the universe didn't have a beginning, and you still haven't given me any scientific evidence that it did. I mean, if the universe has always been here, then all of this talking really doesn't mean anything. Can you back it up, or are we just going in circles? I mean, how can we really know that the universe had a beginning?
You're right. The argument for a creator does fall apart without a beginning. You want evidence, and I think I know just the place to show it to you. Let's go for a field trip. Sound good? It's not too far from here where they actually discovered that the universe had a beginning, or at least the evidence that implies that it does.
To show Joe what he was talking about, Dan took him and Elena to Mount Wilson Observatory, located 5,000 feet above downtown Los Angeles. Mount Wilson is where the expansion of the universe was first observed by the men behind the Big Bang, Edwin Hubble, Albert Einstein, and a Catholic priest named Georges Lemaitre. Friar Lemaitre first formulated the Big Bang theory in 1923 in response to a problem related to Einstein's theory of relativity. Up to that point, Einstein believed the universe had always existed in a steady state, which means the universe has always been here, neither expanding nor contracting. Lemaitre showed Einstein a mathematical solution that demonstrated the universe was expanding. At first, Einstein didn't like the solution because it challenged all his assumptions about the nature of our reality. He even acknowledged that Lemaitre's math was correct, but didn't want to believe the implications of that math, that there had to be a creator of some kind. Eventually, Edwin Hubble showed Einstein observational evidence at Mount Wilson backing up Lemaitre's theoretical model, convincing him that the universe is expanding, and thus had a beginning. In the end, Einstein admitted, "This is the most beautiful and satisfactory explanation of creation to which I have ever listened."
So, this is where we'll see the same evidence for a beginning of the universe that convinced Einstein?
Yep. I'm so glad you thought of coming here, Dan. This is an incredibly special spot. This is the place where Einstein first realized that God really could have created the universe. God came back into science right here, and everything we know about the universe changed. Kind of gives me chills just thinking about it.
Right? That's a little dramatic, don't you think? I mean, it's just an observatory.
I don't think it's too dramatic. And you have to imagine what an amazing discovery this was. This is where Edwin Hubble showed Albert Einstein the evidence for an expanding universe. Evidence that implied the Big Bang, which implies that our universe had a beginning. All of a sudden, you're looking at a creator, God, right in front of us. It really happened right here. And it's kind of like finding God's fingerprint across the sky.
Okay, that's kind of cool. I guess I just never thought of an observatory as being the kind of place that can change the world.
Don't worry about it. Most of us don't look at an observatory that way, but it doesn't change just how amazing it is. Come on, guys, let's go check it out.
It will perhaps be said that the conclusion to be drawn from these arguments from modern science is that religion first became possible for a reasonable scientific man about the year 1927. Sir Arthur Eddington, 1882 to 1944, British astrophysicist.
This observatory was founded in 1904 by a very brilliant astronomer named George Ellery Hale, who in his lifetime founded the three greatest observatories in the world. In 1897, the Yerkes Observatory in southern Wisconsin. In 1904, the Mount Wilson Observatory here in California. And in 1948, the great 200-inch telescope at Palomar. These millions of pounds of steel were brought up to the summit of Mount Wilson on a dirt road, on the backs of mules, on mule-drawn carts, or on very primitive motorized vehicles. The two great discoveries made in this dome were both made by staff astronomer Edwin Hubble. 1923, Hubble used this telescope to measure the distance to our next neighboring galaxy, Andromeda, and determined that it was far beyond the reaches of our galaxy, the Milky Way. Overnight, on that very fateful day, October 5th, 1923, the size of the universe expanded exponentially. 1929, Hubble used the same telescope to put a scale to the expanding universe. The further away things are, the faster they're moving away from us. If you play that concept in reverse, it takes you to the creation event, the Big Bang. The great 1929 discovery made by Edwin Hubble in this dome of the scale of the expanding universe was so important that Albert Einstein himself came to visit the Mount Wilson Observatory in 1931 to talk to the staff astronomers about this great discovery.
So that was pretty cool, but I'm still not totally sure I have all the pieces figured out. Hubble showed Einstein that the universe has a scale to its expansion, which is interesting. I liked hearing about that. It's a good story. But I'm still not totally sure how that shows that the universe had a beginning. And if it didn't have a beginning, how can we be sure there's a creator?
Let's talk expansion, Joe. Here, I've got a demonstration for you.
Why do you have rubber gloves in your pocket?
Well, you never know when you're going to need to do an experiment. Now let's take this blue nitrile glove and pretend it's the universe when it's still really small. Now I'm going to draw some dots on it and blow it up. Watch the dots while the nitrile glove gets bigger.
They're moving apart.
And that's exactly what Edwin Hubble showed Albert Einstein. Galaxies moving apart from each other because space-time is expanding. It's actually a pretty amazing discovery. That's why they named the Edwin Hubble telescope after him.
Well, that's pretty cool for Hubble, but that doesn't actually give me any evidence I can use to convince my roommate. Things move apart from each other all the time. Look, I just moved apart from you.
Well, consider this. All the evidence based on direct observation of the galaxies, indicates that they're constantly moving farther apart, just like the dots on that glove. In the future, they'll be even further apart than they are now. But imagine reversing that to look into the past. What would we see?
Well, the dots, I mean, the galaxies are getting closer together.
And where would it end?
It would end just like this glove, with everything deflated to a single point. That's where the universe started out.
So, if we assume the galaxies have been expanding since the Big Bang, then we can assume there was a beginning. But we can only go back so far because once the air's out of the glove, it's empty.
Yep.
So that's the beginning. But only if it's been expanding since the Big Bang. Like I said, things move apart all the time. And sometimes they change directions. Seriously, though, I get the expansion thing, but I do want some evidence that it's only been expanding, because otherwise this doesn't work.
Well, we actually have that kind of evidence, and we're going to show it to you. My goal for now, though, is just to explain that if the universe had a beginning, then something else had to start it.
And that something was God?
Well, what else could it be?
I don't know. Flying spaghetti monsters?
Right.
That's it, though. It really is that simple. The universe started, and we know that no thing can come from true nothing. If it started, something started it.
And we call that something God. And unlike the universe, God didn't need anything to start in, because there's no reason to believe that God had a beginning. Only things that have a beginning need a start. And anything that has a beginning ultimately has to be started by something that doesn't have a beginning. Otherwise, you're just getting something from nothing. Think about it. For anything to have existed at all, something has to have always existed. Otherwise, you just have an infinite regression of things getting started by something else.
And in the end, you can never get something from nothing, ever, no matter how far back you go.
Yep.
I get it. I wonder if Tyler will get it.
Now, there's something else I want to show you. Let's check it out.
All right, sounds good.
You know, Joe, today we have even more evidence of the Big Bang than Father Lemaitre ever did. In addition to his mathematical model and our observations of galaxies moving apart from each other, we've found something called cosmic microwave background radiation. It's all over the universe, and it's actually a remnant of the Big Bang. It's kind of like an echo that we can still hear using a radio antenna. There's lots more evidence, too. We've sent up satellites that have made observations and findings that verify the Big Bang even more precisely. So, we've got a theory and real-world observations that back up the Big Bang. It's one of the most rigorously established scientific theories. For example, our observations tell us that the Big Bang happened about 13.7 billion years ago. We've also got a pretty good idea of how much matter there must be in the universe and what kind of matter it is.
So, this evidence shows that the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe and that it happened 13.7 billion years ago?
Well, not exactly.
Oh, come on. Can't you ever give me an easy answer?
No, well, big questions take big answers.
Well, most physicists believe that the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe, and we know how old it is. But there's some speculation that it might not have been the real beginning. What if there was something before the Big Bang?
Wait a minute. I thought we agreed that we can't get something from nothing.
Well, some scientists speculate, and it's all speculation, that our universe could be part of a multiverse, or we could be in a bouncing universe.
Bouncing universe? That's that science fiction stuff, right?
Yeah. A bouncing universe expands and contracts over and over again. Imagine a big bang, followed by a big crunch, and then another big bang.
Huh. Cool. But is there any evidence for a bouncing universe or a multiverse?
No, none. They're both completely theoretical.
But the Big Bang was just a theory, too, until we found all that evidence that you just showed me. If there's a theory that takes out God, shouldn't we be worried about it?
Yeah, definitely. But even a multiverse or a bouncing universe can't take out God. Both of them would still require an ultimate beginning. So even if there is a multiverse, or we live in a bouncing universe, we still need a creator to start it all.
And not just any creator, one that didn't have a beginning. Otherwise, you're just looking at something from nothing. Remember the proofs? They're very clear on that one.
Wow. But you know what I'm going to ask you next, right?
You want evidence you can show your roommate.
Right.
Well, the good news is I've got some evidence that he won't be able to complain about at all. In fact, it's such good evidence that nobody has ever been able to deny it. Want to hear a story?
Does it have a flying spaghetti monster in it?
Nope. Even better. It's a tale of 3 physicists.
Our story begins with 2 physicists. Dr. Arvind Borda, of the Kavli Institute at UC Santa Barbara and Dr. Alexander Vilenkin of Tufts University. In 1993, they formulated a proof that showed if our universe, or any expanding model, met 5 conditions, it would have to have a beginning. This proof is still valid today, but they continued their investigation.
What's an inflationary model?
Remember when we blew up that glove with all the dots on it? Well, an inflationary model is just a fancy way of saying a universe that expands gets bigger.
Why couldn't they just say that?
Well, we could, but then scientists like me wouldn't feel so important during lectures. You ready to keep going?
Okay, back to the story.
In 1999, another physicist, Dr. Alan Guth, an MIT professor who is also a major contributor to the contemporary Big Bang Theory, was studying various inflationary models that could describe our universe. Guth came up with a remarkable conclusion. It looks like eternally inflating models necessarily have a beginning. As hard as physicists have worked to try to construct an alternative, all the models that we construct have a beginning. They are eternal into the future, but not into the past. Though a loophole was discovered in 1997 called the weak energy condition, it was thought to be virtually inapplicable to our universe, and so the proof is still generally valid today.
Eternal into the future, but not into the past.
Well, it just means that the universe didn't have to end, but it does have to begin.
Okay, so these 2 proofs weren't enough.
It's never enough, Joe. I mean, we always keep looking for more information. That's how science works. Now, can we finish the story?
In 2003, Borda Vilenkin and Guth decided to team up and combine their research into a new proof. One of the most important and remarkable proofs humanity has ever seen, because this proof ultimately leads to the conclusion that there must be some sort of creator. Called the BVG theorem, this proof has only one requirement: that the average rate of expansion of any possible universe be greater than 0, meaning that in its lifetime it will expand more than contract. Not only does this include our universe, but any multiverse, bouncing universe, or any other kind of theoretical universe, including those speculated by M-theory and higher dimensional space. No scientist has ever been able to refute it or offer any evidence that it isn't true. None. The BVG theorem stands and has never been successfully challenged.
So, this shows that all universes, even a multiverse or a bouncing universe, needed to have a beginning. What's with the M-theory and the higher dimensional stuff?
Oh, don't worry about those. They're just more theoretical kinds of universes. The important thing to remember is that regardless of the type of universe, the proof still applies, so long as that universe has a rate of expansion greater than 0. And ours definitely does. You know, Vilenkin said something pretty cool about this, something you might want to share with Tyler. Inflation without a beginning is impossible.
Impossible? I thought scientists didn't like to use words like impossible.
They don't. So what does that tell you?
This Guth guy was pretty serious. The universe really did have a beginning.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter what kind of speculative universes or multiverse there are or could be. So long as their rate of expansion is greater than 0, they all had to start somewhere.
What about a universe that's not expanding?
Well, that's irrelevant, because our universe is expanding, and you can't have a multiverse or a bouncing universe that doesn't expand. They all had to start somewhere. They all need a beginning. And whatever started them had to be infinite, something that's outside of space and time, something that didn't have a beginning itself.
Something like God. I'm really seeing this. Wow, why doesn't everybody know this?
No, they really should, huh? But the proof just came out in 2003, and schools can't afford to buy new books each year. Not only that, I suspect your teachers are busy enough that they don't have a chance to keep up with the latest and greatest news in theoretical physics. But you know, next time your roommate says there isn't a God, why don't you ask him how the universe could have began with nothing to start it? Ask him how we get something from nothing. I'd love to see how he answers.
I'll bet he can't answer it at all.
Well, don't be too hard on him. No one else can answer that question either. But I think we're just about out of time now, so do you want to give us a summary for the day? See if you've really got all this figured out?
Yeah, let me try. Based on what the BVG theorem tells us, there's really good evidence that our universe had to have a beginning. In fact, any universe connected to ours had to have one too. And the BVG theorem is really solid because it only has one condition and no one can refute it. It's bulletproof.
Well, more like a Kevlar vest. Remember, in science, we always look for more information, and you don't need to be afraid of that.
Right. If God is real, and I certainly believe he is, then nothing we learn about him is ever going to point us away from him. Science is just one more tool for learning about our Creator. It can't threaten him.
Okay, so let's try this again. The BVG theorem says that any universe with an expansion rate greater than 0 had to have a beginning. And that means our universe, any universe attached to our universe, even a multiverse or a bouncing universe or one of those M theories and all those dimensions, right?
You got it.
Okay, so then comes the second step, which is the logic part. If they had a beginning, then that means there was a time when they didn't exist. There was nothing there. And because no thing can come from nothing, something had to create our universe.
And so far, no one's given us a better solution that makes any more sense than God.
Definitely. You know, for something as boring as philosophy and physics, this is actually getting pretty interesting.
Hey.
As we learned in the first episode, disproving the existence of God is almost impossible. This time we explored the evidence from science, philosophy, and logic that God actually does exist. One of the strongest pieces of evidence we have was the discovery that our universe had a beginning, made by a Belgian priest named Georges Lemaitre. This beginning is called the Big Bang. Essentially, there was nothing, and then the universe came into existence in a mighty explosion. How does this show we had a creator? Logic tells us that if there is nothing, truly nothing, no time, no vacuum, no space, and no energy, something can't just suddenly appear from it. Something else must create it, or it couldn't exist. We call this creator God. And in future episodes, we will explore why it is reasonable to think that God is intelligent and benevolent. Most scientists agree that the Big Bang was the beginning of our universe. But some theorize that something physical existed before the Big Bang. Some of their theories include bouncing universes or multiverses. But even if there was some period before the Big Bang, it would also need a beginning. According to the BVG theorem, a theorem that has never been successfully challenged by any scientist to date, even a bouncing universe or multiverse connected to our own universe would ultimately need a beginning. According to physicist Alexander Vilenkin, a V in the BVG theorem, we made no assumptions about the material content of the universe. We did not even assume that gravity is described by Einstein's equations. So if Einstein's gravity requires some modification, our conclusion will still hold. The only assumption we made was that the expansion rate of the universe never gets below some non-zero value, no matter how small. The conclusion is that inflation without a beginning is impossible. What does this mean for us? Logic tells us that any universe that has an ultimate beginning, such as ours, needs a creator of some kind. Something can't just come from nothing. Science tells us that our universe must have had a beginning. Thus, it is reasonable to assume that a creator exists. But what kind of creator? How do we know that our God is that creator? We'll explore these questions in the next episode of The Reason. The Reason series also has an accompanying website, www.thereasonseries.org, where you can join our online forum as a registered user of this class.